Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Richard Mulholland. Rich is the founder of presentation powerhouse Missing Link, as well as a global public speaker who in 2019 alone spoke in 26 countries on 6 continents. He has written 3 books, and his latest is Here Be Dragons: How to Win Deals and Influence Ideas by Mastering the Eloquent Art of Storytelling. Rich is an expert on helping his clients survive the fourth industrial revolution. He's a master of happy endings, and he's read To the Power of Sick. Ladies and gentlemen, the boredom slayer himself, Rich Mulholland. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Francisco. I appreciate it. There's 2 things there. One, it's master the eloquent art of story selling, because I actually go to war. I go to war with the idea of story selling. And then the second is I have a talk on the fourth industrial revolution. I don't believe it's the fourth. I don't believe it's industrial, and I don't think it's a revolution. But that's it.
Oh, I know.
That could be a fun topic.
I was hoping to see you get really angry and then try to master your face back.
Beautiful.
Because I've read the book, and there's a very clear point about how you hate the idea of the fourth industrial revolution. I don't think I ever heard that, to be honest. Anything. What is the fourth industrial revolution? What is it supposed to be?
So there was a while ago, I was actually asked, there was a speaker who was booked for an event to speak about the fourth industrial revolution, and they canceled. And a friend of mine actually contacted me, and he said, listen, dude, like I had this speaker on the fourth industrial revolution and he canceled. Can you fill in? And I was like, bro, I've never heard of the fourth industrial revolution. And he said, but how not? Like, that's all everyone's talking about. And it's basically, you had these different industrial revolutions. It started off was when people got into cities, and then we went to automation, and then we got into computerization, and now we're in this fourth industrial revolution. And it was started by a guy called Charles Schwab, he's basically the head of the IMF or the World Monetary Fund or something like this. And it's become the buzzword. Like every corporate is like, how do we survive the fourth industrial revolution? And the problem is that, again, I was at school. I was at school after the third one was supposed to have happened, and nobody told me about 2 and 3. Everybody I know had only heard about the Industrial Revolution, not the original one, the third one. Yeah, the original one, the OG. Yes. The second thing was that it isn't really a revolution in that the changes that nobody's working on a schedule now. When there was a war, I can understand when that was a revolutionary state, so things change. But actually, people were working in an evolutionary state. This would happen, and that would happen, and this would happen. Ironically, to some degree, we could make a case for COVID-19 being a revolutionary state change. But then the other thing was the fact that it was industrial. I think the least interesting part of what the changes we're going through in the world right now, the least interesting part is industrial. I actually think if it's a revolution, it's a hominal revolution. I think the first hominal, as humans, revolution happened when we learned how to communicate and learned speech. I think the second one is we're now getting beyond communication, beyond low resolution vocal communication as we know it. And I think the world can potentially change into something very, very different that I'm excited to think about. That could be revolutionary.
Now, I need to be very careful here not to fall into the trap that I think at least a couple of other podcast hosts have fallen when interviewing you, which is you are, if anything, too interesting, and then people get into these random conversations with you, and taken from a guy who listened to, I think, 3 different podcasts that had storytelling or story selling in the title of the podcast, but the amount that you actually spoke about those things was very minor in the podcast, because people started talking to you about business and about entrepreneurship and about all of these other things. And there was one that I heard I think it took 40 minutes to go through the introduction. It was an incredible thing because you were discussing bits of the introduction.
That was so fun. That was an EO podcast. I'm a member of Entrepreneurs Organization, and he basically read out my intro, and we went back. And by the time the podcast finished, we'd only just finished the bits of the intro. It was very amusing. Dave's a phenomenal interviewer as well. It was a lot of fun.
he kept coming back to it and going, "This is the worst podcast ever." No, you're good. You're a good guest, but this is terrible. I don't know what I'm doing here.
It
And
was
and
enjoyable for me, which I think I always say when I train public speakers, uh, your audience can never enjoy receiving a presentation more than you enjoy delivering it. The first person you have to entertain is yourself. And so if you and I can have a good time today, if we can enjoy our conversation, then our audience has a chance. So I always feel like that's a good place to go. And that's all that happened in that particular podcast. The two of us were having the best time ever. It may have been only us, but at least there's a chance at other people. But if we're bored and going through the motions, then it's going to be a terrible conversation.
yeah, I think the concern is that, and this is something I'm always very aware when I'm doing podcasts. Even though this podcast is about storytelling, and the vast majority of what I talk to people is storytelling, I I am aware when I start having conversations that veer off. That yes, they are fun and people enjoy listening to them, but at the same time, one bit of advice that I've heard from a lot of podcasters that are more experienced is saying, your podcast is there to answer a question. If you're not Joe Rogan, just having fun conversations that go on for hours might not be the best way to run a podcast. You want your audience saying, okay, I'm coming in for one thing. I want to get this thing out of the way. Like if there's more in there, that's great. But as long as you have that enough focus to get that one thing out covered, then fine. And sometimes there's a temptation to just go off in five different directions, and I think sometimes the conversation suffers. Now, one person who I kind of did that, but I think I actually got a very good conversation out of is someone I believe Connor Neo.
Yeah, I know Connor very well. We're good friends. Yeah,
Yeah, so
he's awesome.
Connor, like me, lives here in Barcelona, so I know him. I know him personally. We have common friends, but professionally as well. He works on the same MBA I do, and I had him on the show a while back, and it was at the time the longest episode I had done, and it's still one of my favorites and my audience's favorite. It's well
Yeah, I
worth
love.
listening to.
In fact, he just posted a very interesting article as yesterday, as of or while we were recording this, on how to get paid as a speaker. Yeah, Connor actually took me. So I'm an ice hockey fan. I fundamentally hate soccer, but Connor took me to a Barcelona soccer game when I was there, and I don't think I like soccer anymore, but I loved the experience of being at the game.
And this is, I mean, he might not have done you a great favor when it comes to loving soccer or football, as we would call it here, because Barcelona, as football stadiums go, has one of the worst atmospheres, at least that I've ever experienced. I'm from Brazil, so pretty much any boring run of the mill game in the middle of the week is about 10 times more hectic than a Barcelona game.
Wow.
So yeah, so there's always that. But then if you like ice hockey, people are throwing their gloves down and punching each other. So that's excitement that is that's hard to beat.
Yeah, that's my game.
No. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to get out of the way, because I think that's to at least in the beginning, that is the core of your book and something you've already touched on by correcting my faux pas at the introduction, which is what is your problem with storytelling, or at least storytelling as you understand it or as you see it all the time?
Well, I think it's okay now with okay, so I'm going to be absolutely blunt here, and we can debate it. I respect you. We can have a conversation. I think storytelling as a concept is quite useless. Telling somebody tell a story is it's like saying, asking Stephen King advice. How do I write a great book? As I say, in my book, and he says, "Oh, tell a story." Oh, thanks. What am I supposed to do with that? Actually, there's so much more to it. The other problem is that when people hear storytelling, they think, tell story. And they extend that and extrapolate that to be tell my story or tell a story about me. Nobody cares about your story. I don't think we're trying to tell people a story. That is taking a prepackaged idea and telling it to them. I think what we're trying to do is sell people a new story about their life in which we play a part. So right now, there's a movie of your life, and if you were to die a year from now, 50 years from now, At the end of that movie, all it's going to say, my part in your film is just going to be podcast guest. My job is to move from podcast guest higher. It's never going to be my story. I just want to have make you have a different story because now I exist in it. And so Connor Neal has now got a better part. He's like top podcast guest. So now he's up there. So I think the word storytelling is so useless as a concept. It's so vague that it actually becomes unhelpful, and people just grab on what they think it means, and then it actually makes for worse presentations. It makes for presentations or communication where people show up and throw up, and they just talk about themselves. If I can sell you a story in which you believe that there is a problem that you now think that I can help you fix, then all of a sudden we got a movie to make.
There's a couple of things there that I would like to unpack. But first of all, I really love that I think this analogy, a metaphor of seeing everyone's life as a movie in which they are the stars and we are just supporting actors. I think there's a lot that you can do with that idea. But when it comes to storytelling being useless as a concept, I've had this discussion before with some people. They didn't necessarily call it story selling. They just had, I think the person I'm thinking of said something like, you don't tell stories, you use stories. So I've seen that phrase that way. My pushback to that is that I don't actually disagree with that at all, because I think that when people talk about storytelling that way, they're talking about bad storytelling. Because sharing an anecdote is one thing. To me, stories are real life examples that make a point. If you're going to share something, it needs to be making a point. That point obviously needs to be relevant to the audience that you're sharing it with. So if it's a sales meeting, if it's a keynote, like, why are you sharing that story? That story needs to be trying to do something very specific. If you don't know that, then you're right. Then you're just telling a story, and that's one of the most useless things you can possibly do. People are going, why are you sharing that? Like, so, good story, bro, but
Hmm.
what what's the point of that? So I don't disagree with you at all. To me, it's just sometimes it can come across to me that sort of attack on storytelling is just an attack on bad storytelling. So I think that's the first part. So I don't.
Okay, let's visit that. Both of us are professionals in this space. I think words matter. And I think people reach what's called a degree of semantic stretch. Like there's certain words, like for example, the word love or the word brand. It means so many nuanced things in so many different ways that some people refer to brand, but they mean corporate identity. Some, there's all these different things that actually the word stops becoming useful. Now, for sure, I do believe there's good storytelling, but actually, I think that good storytelling is selling a story to people. You can tell stories in service of that. But I think the job of making presentations interesting is to first or to use stories to sell stories to other people. And if in absence of that important thing, that's why it's not just because to me, using stories and telling stories, there's not an interesting enough differentiation. There's not enough for another human to go, huh, I understand what you're saying here. But when you move from storytelling to story selling, you are now understand what you're trying to do is, I'm trying to sell them a new version of their world. How do I do that? But I do think stories have an important part to play. The next part, though, that I think where people make a problem, and I guess this goes to your bad versus good, is I think that we overvalue the story. So the job, if I said to you, so tomorrow night I'm going to an ice hockey game, and if I said to you, how do I have a nice night tomorrow? And you said to me, get in your car. Well, yes, getting in my car is very, very important for getting to the ice rink where I'm going to go watch South Africa play Thailand in ice hockey. But the objective is to watch the hockey game. And if the hockey game, if my car breaks down, then I'll take my Vespa. Okay, so the job is not to drive the car. The job is to get to the game. Now, in the metaphor for me of presenting, I refer to this as when I want to give my dog medicine. My dog hates a pill. You can't give him a pill. But if I could give him peanut butter and he loves peanut butter. So what do? We put the pill inside the peanut butter. Now, for me, and the dog will take it no problem. The pill is the payload. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to deliver the pill. If I just give it the information, the raw information is too bitter for my audience to process. But If you say just tell a story, you may as well just say give them some peanut butter. If you just give them peanut butter, they will enjoy it, but they will not get better. They will not change. So we need to understand that the story is simply the delivery message, not the purpose, right? It is the peanut butter to the pill. And understanding the ratio of those two things and understanding that the one is in service of the other. It is the vehicle, it is the path to victory, not the victory condition itself. And that's why I say storytelling by itself is not is too broad a frame to be useful or helpful, and it commands too much real estate in people's brains already for them not to know to understand the subtlety that you see.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I think you use the word semantics. I think sometimes in these discussions of business storytelling we can fall into a bit of semantics, but I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone who, in my opinion, understands storytelling, who would ever advocate for anyone to not Andy Enriquez, who's a speaker on storytelling, he uses the analogy of you don't sell people if you want to sell someone a trip, you sell the destination, you don't sell the airplane is irrelevant, the airplane is just to get you there. I think that if you understand storytelling, you understand that storytelling, at least business storytelling, is the airplane. It's not where what we're trying to do is get people somewhere, and it might be that story is the best way to do that. It won't always be. There'll be plenty of other ways to get them there, and if you think story is the only way to get them there, that you have a problem as well.
For sure. And I guess that's what I'm going to war with. You see, you say most professional people understand what storytelling is. But then what we do is we give that advice on 5 ways to be a better public speaker. Tell stories, know your audience. All of these rubbish things that actually really, well, they're not all rubbish, but they're rubbish if people don't understand the context. So we as
They're too vague.
professionals, yeah, I've owned a presentation company for 25 years since I was 22. I've been a professional speaker for 19 years. Sometimes I forget that, oh, this is obvious to me, but what's big in my world isn't big in the world. So when I go out and I say to somebody, tell a story, I realize that they're not hearing storytelling from the perspective of me or you. They're hearing storytelling from the perspective of them. And for most people, storytelling is sitting around a campfire, sharing a great story about last year's holiday and this hilarious thing that happened. And even
Yes.
when I work with professional speakers, a lot of them think the first thing they want to do is they want to tell their story. But actually, most speakers, most great speakers, unless you are, we refer to them as the Olympiad, unless you're at the very, very top of your game in some field, people aren't, or if you're famous, unless you're famous, people aren't there to hear your story. They're here to write a better version of their own. So it's better to take on the mindset of a researcher or a journalist than, and use stories in terms of that rather than to get on stage and tell your personal story about your entrepreneurial woes.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So this is the second point from what we initially started talking about that I want. I mean, I think you've just answered the question, which is that I do believe that there is value in sharing personal stories. I do believe that at times, depending on what you're doing, not necessarily on a keynote, but in lots of circumstances, there is a value in having a origin story and sharing that. Podcast being a pretty good example when people get ask us the same question over and over again. If you can tell your own story in 2-3 minutes and get a lot out, every single interview has 10-15 minutes wasted while you're trying to go through your biography. But again, to me, that is there to serve a purpose. It's why, I mean, how do you tell your own story? Well, you need to be trying to do something to the audience. You want them to relate to you. You want them to see themselves in you. You want them to see you as an expert. There is a clear point that story is there to deliver. And if you don't have that, then, it's just, I think you're in love with yourself and you want to talk about how amazing you are. So I'm
Yeah.
still trying to get
And
over. I'm still trying to get over the fact that you mentioned you're going to watch ice hockey with South Africa and Thailand. South
yeah,
Africa and Thailand play ice hockey. It's
it's
been on the back of my mind. There's some cognitive dissonance here.
yeah, there really, really is. We had a good laugh because I was actually when the last game 2 days ago with South Africa, and so I'm a big Toronto Maple Leafs fan. And our scaling up coach in our business is actually based in Montreal. And when I was having a coaching call, we were doing some strategy work the other day. There, he actually, I said like, "Oh, South Africa's busy playing Thailand," and you could see his brain was going through this. I don't understand. There's a live stream. I'll send it to you for fun. You can see. Yeah, it's a very small. There'll be like the only people in the room will be friends and family, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. I saw South African Bosnia play on Sunday as well.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. So one of the other things that you talk about, and as I just started reading the book, I thought, okay, well, I've heard this before when you were talking about how you shouldn't be the hero of your own story. You're not a hero. The hero is sitting on the chair, and that's, I think, been made popular by Donald Miller with building a story brand quite a while back. But the thing I thought was the main, I think the concept in your book that is not something you see many people talking about is the dragon. So
Yeah.
I think that is the part. Yes, here we dragons. I think that is the part of your book that there's 100%. Is it 100% original? Anything? I don't think anything is 100% original. But that, having read a million different storytelling books, that's the one I've seen you gave more attention and flashed out more than anyone I've seen talk about. It was more vivid because dragons are cool. So you talked about the two jobs
We can be
of
friends.
the storytelling. Well, I've got little Logan here in the corner. I'm trying to buff up my nerd credentials. Um, right. So you can you just talk a little bit about the two jobs of the storyteller as you describe them in the book?
Right. Okay. So
The first two jobs.
first of all, let me say, I'm so glad you picked up on that because that's exactly what it was. I actually find when we started doing the training in this, we spoke a lot about the hero's journey, and of course, I mean, this is something in a presentation for 25 years. The hero's journey comes into it, but actually, the more I think about it, is that we overvalue the hero. The hero is simply the person that has to take the action, but the hero is fundamentally uninteresting. Like. If it wasn't for Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker would still be a moisture farmer in Tatooine, right? Like nothing would have changed. Most people's life, even though I'm selling to somebody tomorrow who's the head of HR of a bank. Yes, I can think of them as the hero and it's their story and blah blah blah. But the truth is, most people's stories don't feel pretty heroic. They don't feel like they got a big challenge. Now, I guess where I deviate from Donald Miller, and I would say I deviate quite it's a bit of a big split, is I don't like the terminology of the villain. I think the villain makes the role quite specific. So sell a problem and then there's a solution. My line for that we always say is you don't sell the features and benefits of the ambulance, you sell the accident and the ambulance will sell itself. Nobody negotiates with the ambulance driver, right? If there's an accident, there's an ambulance. But I think that we need to be more nuanced than that. And I think the dragon is a great thing because it represents three different areas. I'm going to explain these three things very, very quickly, and then I'll tell you what the two questions I think we have to do with people is. The first thing is the term of the book, Here Be Dragons, Hic Sant Dracones, was the sign that used to be written on the old maps. We all knew that dragons existed because every culture had them, but we didn't know where to find them. So what they would put is they would put the map on the dragon. They would put a little sea serpent of the dragon and they would write the term at the bottom, Here Be Dragons. And the idea was glory and discovery and adventure, and exploration that exists when we go out to find the dragons. So the dragon represents curiosity. It's the unknown. It's the thing. It's like something that's out there. Like, I don't know what it is yet, but it's exciting because I don't know what it is. So that is one fundamental appeal for humans. Like if they care about the unknown and they know it's out there, that's something we can do. The metaverse at the moment, to some degree, for a lot of people, is a curiosity dragon. Like, we're not sure what it is, but we kind of want to know more. Okay, then what you've got is you've got the dragon as the threat. And that's a pretty obvious one. Hey, there's a dragon coming to attack the village. Okay, I've got to be called to action to defeat the dragon. But then we've got the drag as the obstacle. And the dragon is the obstacle. And the dragon is the obstacle is that over there is a cave, and inside that cave is treasure. The problem is between you and the treasure is a dragon. And it could be sleeping, right? It's not attacking you, but you got to get around the dragon in order to get to the opportunity. And actually, I find that for most people in most day-to-day business, The problem from a sales point of view, you're not selling against a big attacking dragon, because most people, like, Y2K software, when it came out, everybody wanted to get it. When COVID-19 happened, you don't have to do a sales pitch when the dragon's on their door. Okay, what you've got to do, though, most of us are, there is an obstacle and there's an opportunity behind it. So I believe that the job of the storyteller, of anybody selling anything, an idea to their staff, a strategy to their team, investor update to their investor community, or of course just a straight day-to-day sales pitch, you've got two jobs. Job number two is to help your audience slay their dragon, right? Whatever it is, or get past their dragon, or find the dragon, you've got to help make that happen. Job number one is to make sure they see it. The biggest single problem that faces most people is they don't know the dragon exists. And the big problem that most people make on a sales point of view is they sell the broader dragon of the category. So they do as much of a job of selling for their competitors as for themselves. The most important thing is that you have to sell, we call it UPS, the unique problem only you can solve, or UDS, the unique dragon that only you can slay. If I can convince them that there is a dragon out there that everybody else can help slay generally, and I can too, but there's one problem that I can uniquely help you solve. If you care and believe that that dragon exists, or you really, really want that treasure or to have that discovery, then we're the only people that can help you get there. Long answer, small question. Sorry.
No. It's great. I mean, because my brain is going around with the last thing, because so let's take you for example, right? So you have a presentation company. You help people deliver suckle asset presentations, I think is the line I've seen somewhere from you. So for example, in your case, the general dragon is that presentations suck, that people are not good presenters, that they don't achieve the results they want when they present. So I guess that's sort of the general dragon, and people might come to you knowing that, if either they'll ask for better slides, which is kind of a silly dragon, but they might want the better presentation. In your particular case, how have you turned that generic dragon into your UDS or UPS?
Okay, so you hit the nail on the head there. Most people who come to us, first of all, most people don't think they're bad at presenting. They are unconsciously incompetent. Okay, and I'll explain to you why I think this is. I want you to imagine there's a big cross in front between us and the screen. Okay, a big X, like one of those things. And at the bottom of one is skilled, and at the top is unskilled. Okay, so the north-south is skilled and unskilled. The east-west is chaotic and standardized. Most people exist in a space of, like, the average person. The easy customers for us are people who are chaotic, unskilled. They're consciously incompetent. They know they don't know what they need. They come to us, and actually they're relatively easy because we explain to them what they want, and away they go. Unfortunately, the majority of people think that doing lots of presentations makes them good. So they come and they say, hey, I'm a great speaker. I just need nice slides. I don't want to bore my audience. Can you make my bad PowerPoint pretty? Now, when you have somebody who's a good speaker with no structure, they are just hot air. They're like that relative that speaks at the wedding, that loves the sound of their own voice. It goes on and on, but never makes a point. Okay, so this is the problem that we have. So the dragon we have to sell them is that their skill is not enough. And the way that we do that is we say to them, we actually don't sell the fear dragon, that you're not good enough. We sell the opportunity dragon. So I think that the difference between you and a paid public speaker is you have all the talent, but you've not yet been taught the structure. I don't believe that you have a skills problem. I don't even think you have a slides problem. We can make slides for you, but it's just going to amplify and make prettier, but it's not going to make you the star of the show. I actually believe you have star quality, and I think that what we have to do is to get you to the other side, in which you have high skill and great standards, because actually good presentation and narrative has structure. So now what I've done is I've made a play, and I think we're uniquely placed to do this. We're not a presentation design company, we're a presentation strategy company. I think that we can actually give your message the strategy it deserves, so that your message is operating at the level of you as the speaker. Now, you tell me how you would feel if somebody said that to you. Now you feel that I'm being held back, that I've got this raw talent, that I'm the next Simon Sinek, and all I need is to get a little bit more structure, and these guys can unlock that in me. Every other arsehole has been talking to me about making pretty slides. I've got 3 other quotes for slides, and I've got 1 other quote for give me a structure that will make me famous. And so that's it. So
Okay,
we
so
figure out what they are selling, and we, yeah,
okay, so
we got a
so in
different.
to try and summarize that, the terrible company would just sell them the better, the prettier slides. The average company might go, well, you need to be a better speaker. And what you're saying, it's a skill issue. You don't have the skill, we need to give you the skill. And what you say you guys do is just say, no, you've got, you don't, the slides are not the issue, you've got the skill, but you've been pointed in the wrong direction, or you haven't had enough structure to get all that skill to its potential, or something
We
along those
lead
lines.
with structure because we think structure
Mm.
is our unfair advantage. So the UDS, the unique dragon that we can only help them slay, is that we have a really really tight formulaic narrative. And I do believe that
Yes.
literally no presentation cannot be improved by formula. Once you understand the formula, once you understand the recipe, you add
Yeah.
your own ingredients, make your own lasagna. Okay, there's no debating that. But don't try and make a lasagna if you don't first understand the fundamental recipe. And most people don't. They just throw like mince and cheese and ingredients in, and they don't. They wonder why it isn't. So I don't know now if I'm like thoughtful or hungry, like I'm craving lasagna. So we lead with that, but of course we make money off these slides and the video and the coaching. And in fact, I would think our coaching is the big part of what we do. We just have a fundamental belief that a good presentation is written before it is designed, before it is delivered. And you have to tackle in that order.
So it's interesting you talked about structure, because one of the things that is the case with your book. So this is an ongoing conversation or debate I've had with people in the almost 100 episodes I've done with this, which is some people absolutely swear by structure, some people don't like it at all, and there's some people that are in the middle. In your book, and again, this might just be a very smart commercial move on your part, but in your book there is structure when it comes to presentation, because you talk about your care, believe, know, do structure, but there isn't structure when it comes to the story itself. So you're telling people about selling a different story, you're telling about finding customer stories, but I don't believe that at any point of the book, and I've finished it, so I think it's not there, you actually saying, okay, so if this is how you tell a good story, like this is sort of the parts of a good story, or the structure, this is the order. So I don't know if that's in your programs that people go and hire you for after they like the book, or is this you think that the story itself doesn't need a structure, but the presentation does?
I know for me, if I was the action framework, the care, believe, no, do, is absolutely the structure we follow for storytelling. If I want to tell you a story, I've got to start making you care about why this matters. Then I've got to give you a trust statement. You've got to trust what I'm doing. Then I've got to tell you the information that you need to know about it. And finally, I've got to explain to you why I told you this and what you're supposed to do with it. And that is the call to action component of it. So we are trying to do that. I am a little bit freer on because I'm saying that is the overarching story that you're selling, that has structure. But inside there are little like you said, anecdotes and cool stories, which I, by the way, thrive off telling. Like I love telling personal stories to get that link to people and to actually humanize myself. For those things, we worry more about the 3 elements. And Connor would have spoken about this. He would have spoken about logos, pathos, and ethos. I think that the terms, like I think it's too. We don't need to learn new terms. For me, it's head, heart, and gut. It's have they said something that appeals to my head that feels smart? Have they had something that said something that I care about? Here is this story something that I'm invested in? And gut says, do I have a gut feel about either the validity of the story or the character of the person telling it to me? And so is my gut feel. And for me, stories all have to measure up against those 3 things. Do they appeal to the head, the heart, and the gut? And the ratios can change slightly depending on the purpose of the story. By the way, I do have, as a paid professional speaker, certain content that is literally designed to be purely entertaining. I tie it back so tenuously that it's laughable. But I also understand that a big part of why people hire me is I'm supposed to be I'm like the Barney. Hey, everybody. I'm supposed to be there giving people a good time as well. And so I work in those things so that at the end of it, they remember that guy was clever, but also, wow, that was fun and I really enjoyed it. They forget that those were 2 separate conversations and they just think of them as one thing. So I'm not
That's a
as
pretty good. That's a pretty good Barney, by the
militant.
way.
Thanks, boys
So
and girls.
it's not the first time. Not the first time you've done that one.
No, no, I'm a dad.
Yeah, yeah. So I find that what you said about some stuff being purely entertaining. I find that the challenge, and it doesn't need to be done that way, but for people who have done this for a bit longer, the challenge can be, what is the most entertaining, memorable story you can find that actually connects to the point you're trying to make in a way that doesn't feel super forced. Because I think I don't find this necessarily difficult to find stories, either personal or business stories, that make a point. You can find them every day, but sometimes if you can find one that delivers the point you're trying to deliver, and it's also very memorable and entertaining, then it's that's never gonna hurt if you can do both things with that same story.
Completely, and probably my best-selling story. I talk about an experience I had at the Four Seasons, and it's very very funny, and it has mermaids orgasming and things like this, and everybody's a crowd pleaser every time. It's really really over the top, and people always request it. In fact, when I've told I was speaking in Seattle, I did a shortened version of it using a different experience to illustrate that point. And when the guy stood up who'd booked me, he said, "No, I know we asked you to speak shorter, but please tell the whole story you told us about the Four Seasons." That story is designed to illustrate a very specific point that good service is defined by how well you do your job. Great service is defined by how well you do your not my job. I can get there in different ways, and that story is entertainment woven in. But I've got other content that is just really, really fun, and I can tie it back into the story. And obviously, it feels like it's there, but its actual job there is to trigger peak end theory, to make them remember the high point. So, what was the high point of this talk? Or the high point, oh my God, that was so funny. That was hilarious. Geez, I was crying. And they remember the Ninja Drip story. But then they remember the end story where I present my legacy list, the 3 things I want them to take away, or 5 things I want them to take away. And when peak end theory kicks in, they remember the legacy list, these 3 things that I have to do tomorrow in my business, and the fact that they really enjoyed it. And that's a beautiful combination of things, because when we construct memories later, so somebody tried to book me for a talk now and asked if they could describe me as a stand-up comedian with business tips. And I said, no, please don't do that. Stand-up comedians are supposed to be funny every 30 seconds. I don't have to be funny ever. So if I'm funny 3 times in 30 minutes, people will think I was hilarious. But if you're expecting, when you remember me later, you remember me being hilarious, but I maybe made 4 jokes.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about peak end theory, and I think it's it's probably worth explaining this to people who have no idea what we're talking about. But I also find it interesting that when I wrote a book about public speaking a few years back, I also talked about peak end theory, and I think it's interesting that the experiment you used to illustrate it in your book is the one about putting a hand on a bucket of ice. The one I used is the colonoscopy one.
Oh, yeah.
And so I don't know
Dan
if you
Ariely's
had
one, I
already,
think.
yeah, if you burned yourself out talking about happy endings, and when you got to choose the experiment there, you said, I'm going to go with the bucket of ice on this one. I don't need to go to the colonoscopy experiment.
I felt like I went to the source. So I feel your example was Dan Ariely's example. I think it was. He brought up and predictably
Uh,
irrationally a river,
no,
the
so
colonoscopy.
my example is from Thinking Fast and Slow, from Daniel Kahneman,
Ah,
where I
okay.
believe that I think
The
both the
ice
word
story is
Daniel
also
Kahneman.
Kahneman. Ah, okay.
Yeah. So I think the best. So to people who have no idea what we're talking about. So the peak end rule was this idea where if that we remember the peak of any experience and the end of the experience. So the colonoscopy experiment is they had people go through colonoscopy, which used to be a painful procedure. I don't believe that is the case anymore. And they found that if the exam went on for 10 minutes and it was just horrible throughout, and ended at the same level of awfulness, um, compared to it being 15 minutes, but the last 5 minutes were a lot lower in intensity. People who had the second version of the experiment tended to be less reluctant to repeat the procedure, which was something they had to do. So it was, even though it was 15 minutes and you had the same 10 minutes of horrible pain, because the last 5 were less painful, you remembered it as less bad of an experience. Um, so yeah, so that's the peak and rule. Yes.
So now all I want to say is that you definitely chose the better example. There's no doubt. Like, actually, when I think about it, I'm kicking myself. You're spot on because it's more vivid, because people have a
Mm,
relationship and they can, like, as you were telling it now. And I think the reason I mentioned this is I think actually the choice of stories really matters. So your
mm,
story has more likely narrative transportation because, like, I can kind of imagine where that is. Whereas mine was much more, was less real, and it was more a sociological experiment done with students in a controlled environment to illustrate a point. And I now wish
mm.
I'd gone back and told it your way.
Well, I would love to claim merit for this, but I just tend to find that the most awkward stuff sometimes just makes for the better stories. I had
Completely.
someone talk to me about this the other day. I think someone said something about like an awkward or uncomfortable medical examination, and I said, "Oh, I've I've had something happen to me. I just need to find a business point in that story, and I'll tell it." And and he's like, "Oh, please tell." I was like, "I'm not sure I can share that on LinkedIn."
Yeah, so I believe very, very firmly in my first book, Legicide, I wrote about it, in the difference between best and favorite. And all my stories are correct for favorite, not best. Is this the best story I could have told? And on best, the colonoscopy versus the ice cube story, the ice water story, the essentially both can illustrate the point. But in the favorite, in which one gives you a better chance of on stage having a big fun with it and telling a bit of a joke, getting the audience laughing, really, really pushing and things like that, there's no doubt that the colonoscopy story has much more version of fun in it. But of course, I could tell that story and somebody in the audience might hate it and say that was inappropriate and too personal and things like this. And I'm totally okay. In fact, if I haven't pissed off at least one person, because I believe that you can't be somebody's favorite unless you're willing to be somebody else's worst. And I think as professional speakers and presenters, we have to live on the fringes. Whereas best is just simply, do you check all the boxes to be good?
Yeah. I, I'm trying to think. I was trying to think of business points for this one. It's kind of a simple, basic story for my life, usually, which is just I went to the doctor to do this exam that most men have to do at a certain age, and you're dreading the day. And you go in, and just before he was going to examine me, he said, "Oh, by the way, I've got some students with me. Do you mind if they watch?" And I thought to myself, and I thought to myself, well, listen, I think the worst is about to happen anyway. What difference does it make having an audience there? So it was, I think, a lot worse than I expected it was gonna be. And then as I was composing myself, I looked to the students, and they looked worse than me. Like, I don't know if they were just embarrassed for me or they were just horrified of what profession they had just chosen, but I felt a little better. I looked at them, I was like, maybe it was worse for them.
Yeah, this is a once a year, maybe once a decade at a certain age test for me. This is your life. You're right. You're the putter. So my
Yeah.
funny, I guess, story about that thing was when the guy was doing it. He told me, so I went to one of these executive clinics, and this is something that a test that all gentlemen have to do over the age of 40. So I go to this clinic, and this guy basically is an executive wellness center, and he said that when he drives home every night at work, and he listens to Bruce Whitfield, who does the business show, and all these CEOs and executives are coming on for interviews, talk about their business and their share price. And all he thinks when he's driving home is, yeah, I did that guy. Yeah, I did that guy. And like, that's his point, is, has he examined this person? But then I guess my other story, just purely, this is this slight deviation we promised we wouldn't do earlier. When I went to get the other uh, thing that guys sometimes get when they don't need to have more children. Before the operation, I had to go for a test, and the guy was kind of doing a little bit of a feeler on to make sure that everything was okay. And at that point, a very famous the news on the radio was in the background, and this couldn't have been the worst timing. So quite a famous South African actor who shares my surname had just died. And the news reader came on and said, and in other news, Gordon Mulholland has just been announced dead by his family. And there's this man there, and he's got my bits in his hand, and he realizes my name, and he knows what he's just heard. And he's got this, oh my God, am I supposed to like give sympathy now? What am I supposed to do? And I was like, no relation, no relation. Anyway, this may well
Uh,
go in the cutting room floor.
Oh no! I'll hear yours. I'll raise mine. I had that
Yes.
procedure. I had that procedure last year, right? So the first, so I have two children. One is two girls. One is 5, and the other one is 2. The first one was planned. The second one wasn't. And when we thought there was gonna be a third, so my wife and I completely panicked. And as soon as we found out that we were wrong, I immediately called up the doctor. This was a Wednesday. I booked an appointment for Thursday. So I go in there, and the doctor is talking to me, and he says, okay, let me explain to you the procedure. And then he's like drawing things. I was like, that's not to scale, but fair enough. Go on. And he says, how what you've been doing for to avoid more children. And I said, well, I have a young daughter. I mean, it's not that's my
That's a
that's
contraceptive.
what I did to avoid it. And then he's explaining. It's like, okay, so this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna cut here. We're gonna do this, and then once you've had 25 relations with your wife, then you come back here to check that everything has been done properly. And I said to him, okay, so 25 relations. Okay, can we just book this appointment now for 3 years down the
23.
line?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is your agenda open for 3 years down the
Yeah.
line?
Like, do I book it now?
Yeah. So he says, okay, fine. So he says, okay, so when would you like to do this? I was like, can we do it now? And he's like, no. I mean, you can go home, you can think about it. It's like, I've thought about it. I want to do this as quickly as I possibly can. So we did it 3 days later. Um, and then I remember that I was trying to explain to my youngest what was gonna happen, and it's like, oh, they're gonna do this and they're gonna do that. And she wants to know everything, and she's like, but what if what if the doctor makes a mistake? What if he breaks something? And I said, well, then mommy and I won't play anymore. That's that's what it
That's
is.
hilarious. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So
Okay, by the way, at the
so
beginning
anyway,
you said that you were giving yourself a challenge to talk about stuff that I've never spoken about before in a podcast. Well done, my
there we
friend.
go. we've managed to do colonoscopies, vasectomies, and all this in the exam no man wants to do. All right. Okay. So
Now,
um,
incidentally, these stories are all peanut butter and no pill. For what it's
yes,
worth, for the purpose of this
yes,
particular podcast, although
yes.
hopefully it will play to our peak and end theory.
Yes, yeah. And although I do find that it is a good exercise to take these stories, which are essentially just anecdotes that you would and I have shared with my friends, and turn them around and go, is there any lesson here? Is there anything I've learned? Is there anything the doctor did well or did wrong? Is there any way in how the communication happened? Or again, if you're, I think, if you're a business coach and not like a presentation or a story coach, it's easier because you can find business points on almost anything if you try hard enough. As my focus being storytelling, I find it sometimes like there's no storytelling point I
Right,
can
but
make
that
here.
could be the
But if
story.
I like the exercise,
That could be the story. The story could be, now I've just told you this thing. Now you're worried about the point. Oh, but no, I just told you a story.
there
That's
isn't
the
one.
advice. That's what people keep on telling me. Tell a story. But now, yes, we've shared it. The one slight caveat would be that I do find that once I've built rapport with my audience, I'm in that kind of middle phase, and now they're just here for a good time. I can get away with going a little bit and having some fun with them and taking them to a cool place, telling the story because we built up some rapport. They already trust us and they think we'll get back on track. And then I make a joke and say, no, I deviated there, but I had to tell you. And I come back in, I tie it back and say, why did I tell you this? I told you this because this is what most people do when they're doing storytelling. They tell them stories that are really, really fun and interesting for them. They may even be fun and interesting for the audience, but at the end of them, they're largely forgettable because there isn't a big point. Or even worse, they're so memorable that they take up one of the single most important memory slots in your audience's mind. I can't tell you how many times I tell a story about when you pee, and there's always that one last little ninja drip that's waiting. And if you're wearing beige pants, it will come out, and you've got to be careful. And people will come to me years later and they say, "Oh, I loved your presentation; it was brilliant. You're the ninja drip guy." And I thought, well, actually, I was doing a talk on legacy thinking.
The ninja drip guy. I think Boredom Slayer or Dragon Slayer is a slightly better moniker
Right.
than the ninja drip guy, but it has its appeal.
But that's the problem, right? Because what I used to do in that, it was such a crowd pleaser. And this was before I fully stood peak and end. I would use that as my big finisher. So the peak and the end coincide with a really funny, easy to remember, vivid story that when they see me and they remember me, that's what they take away. So now what I do is I bring that in a little bit in the middle to really lift my talk at the kind of when I'm in the just getting into my legacy list, my building of my core points. But that's my main tell them what they need to know stuff. As I'm getting to the end, then I tie back to it, remind them of the fun stuff, but then summarize my big points and call them to action. So they remember me now as a legacy thinking guy that told the ninja drip story, for example. But I
Yeah.
do see the importance of theater because you want people to remember you 6 months later when they are trying to book another speaker for their company conference.
Yeah, it's something I think anyone that talks about presentations or messaging or stories has to talk about, and you talk about this in the book, about it's not what you say that it's important, it's what they remember. So if they don't remember anything from your talk, doesn't matter how genius it was, it's just gone. Whereas if they remember something, that's better, and if they remember the right thing, that's even better. So if you
Yeah,
can marry
exactly.
the entertaining
Recited
stuff with the yeah.
is less important than remembered, is less important than repeated, is less important than acted on.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
ultimately, you want them to create an action that usually happens when your message is repeated. That will only happen if it's remembered, and it will. I guess then it's the reciting.
And there's just one last thing I wanted to just ask you a bit more about, which I should have asked right at the beginning, and I seem to have skipped my notes. I think we were perhaps talking about colonoscopies, which is this concept, which is, I think, it's less of a storytelling concept than perhaps a business concept, but I don't think I've seen someone put it this way before, and I really liked it, which was that it's a lot more important it's less important to build your own brand than it is to build the brand of the problem you solve. So building the brand of the dragon you slay is way more important than building your own brand as a dragon slayer.
Right, and this goes back to a line one of my good friends, also a speaker, Nick Harrenambus. He'd be a great guest for the future. He talks about curiosity, but this is a line that him and I talk about a lot, and I've already mentioned it on the show once, and that is what's big in your world isn't big in their world. So if I build my brand and I'm the person who talks about one of the big things for us is stage marketing. So it's not public speaking and it's not entrepreneurship. It's the intersection of public speaking and entrepreneurship. And what happens at that intersection is stage marketing. As a thought leader of my business, I go out and I speak about the problem we solve in the world. When people start caring about the problem, they invariably come to our business. Now, one thing would be trying to build the brand of Missing Link, my company, but people don't care about it. And actually, the problem with trying to make people care about presentations is they actually think they're already really good. And in fact, this is what I'm speaking about at Present to Succeed. The MVP, minimum viable presentation, isn't. It blows my mind. The world is not good enough at this. And that is a core problem. So I don't have to build the brand of my business that solves a problem that they don't think they have. And even if it's about public speaking, all I've got to do is build the brand of the dragon. And I think for most people, if you can build the brand of a dragon, you can make people care, go to bed at night and think, sure. And then they're stressing. They don't even have to remember you in the short term, but then they're stressing about something. And then the next time they see, and it's you sharing information again, and you're not even solving the problem. Because again, most people, I've seen 1,000 talks on how to deliver a better presentation. But that we're not solving the right problem because people aren't better. Therefore, what we need is more talks on why to do a better presentation and why we're not good enough at it. And that's about building the brand of the dragon. Most people don't think that the problem you think they have is a big enough problem. And our job is to convince them that it is. If they believe that, they need the weapon to defeat the dragon. And that's what you can help them with. And again, the most important thing about that is that it must be unique. If all of your competitors solve the same problem, then you've done a good job for everyone, but nothing special for you.
Perfect. Perfect. Right. So you mentioned briefly present to succeed. That's happening in the 7th of April, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm not sure the show will come out before then, but if it does come out and it's still in time, to get some tickets for Present to Succeed. Rich is speaking there, and a whole bunch of very good people are speaking there as well. Your book Here Be Dragons is out everywhere, and if people want more of you and the work you do, what's the best place for them to find you?
If you go to getrich.af, you'll find all the details. They'll take you to my personal website, and you don't have to worry about spelling my surname. If you go to getrich.af,
so getrich.af.
so
I missed this one somehow in my research.
yeah, so I like the idea of it. I thought it was like a fun URL, like Get Rich AF.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, and like people can remember it and things. But it was quite funny. I was doing a talk in Saudi Arabia, and at the end, I had my domain getrich.af on the screen, and the guy looked up to me and like, "Hey, why Afghanistan? Well, I don't understand." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I never thought about it. Here, there's a context. Most people don't think of .af as Afghanistan. They think of it, as we think of it." So yeah,
Yes.
getrich.af. By the way, this is maybe a small little tip. But for example, in my business, I've got a terrible URL for my company. It's like MSNGLNK. Nobody ever remembers it. But so I created ineedmissinglink.com. So if people ask me for a link, how do we get to find your company? Even if your home URL is one thing, everyone should make it easier because people are lazy or busy. So make it easier for people to find you. So getrich.af, there's a very, very few numbers in there. I've now mentioned it 3 times, which in the book, I talk about the importance of dropping your price in that magic amount of times. It's in there, and you can go there. /dragon to get the book, and /link farm to find all the links to me in my newsletter and to connect with me on LinkedIn, where I'm probably the most active.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rich. This has been great fun.
Thank you, Francisco. It's been really, really good fun for me too.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.